I'm very happy to welcome you, especially friends, sisters of life who are here today, and then a number of friends from throughout the diocese whose paths I've been privileged to be able to cross over the years. But I know they're also here because of our affection for Damien and our great respect for him as a man of extraordinary faith. He's the father of two. We're currently working for the Knights of Columbus. 3. I'm losing count.
Well, there's twins, and
that's what
that could be the one. Okay.
So,
It's tough.
it's a rough crowd. Either that or I need more coffee. I've only had 6 cups this morning. It's one of those days. But very happy to be here, and especially to be able to hear the witness of a good man of prayer to speak about truly a saint. So before we begin anything, I think we should begin with an opening prayer. So join me in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Through our Lord, through our Lady, to pray. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners now and at the hour of our death. Amen. In the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here this evening. I realize we just prayed. We're going to pray just one more time. You'll be fine. But a quick thank you to Father Suarez and to Carol Bernard and some dear friends sitting right in front of me here that I worked with in the Diocese of Bridgeport. So it's just good it's like a family reunion, to be honest with you. So I'd like to just start with another prayer. It's very special to me. This is a book, I think it's not a Catholic writer, Jesus Calling, but it's a book that I gave my mom when she was dying of cancer. And just today, and I mean this, I was thinking, what kind of prayer could we start with? And I said, boy, she put some sticky tape. And I realized the last one she put on here says the following. It says, do not judge a day as devoid of joy, just because it contains difficulties. Instead, concentrate on staying in communication with me. Many of the problems that clamor for your attention will resolve themselves. Other matters you must deal with, but I will help you with them. If you make problem-solving secondary to the goal of living close to me, you can find joy even in your most difficult days. Amen. So I'm absolutely thrilled to be here, and you're supposed to say that when you give a talk, but this is my favorite topic to talk about, and I could bore you to tears with stories and this and that, and I just might with lots of them. But I'd like to start with the word holiness. So when we think of the word holiness, I think for me, there's 2 things that really help define that. One is a complete, reckless abandonment to God. That's how you achieve holiness. And secondly, it's knowing or coming to know that you are truly powerless without God. I think any of the saints that we know or think about, they've achieved that. They've realized, I'm completely powerless without God, and I must abandon myself to God. And I didn't get into personalities about the saints. I'm just saying, spiritually, I must abandon myself to God. So this evening, I'd love to talk to you about a family. It's our family, actually. And specifically, it's those members of our family that are always there for us. They never, ever let us down. And they go to bat for us every single day, 24/7. It's our family. And this family is called the Communion of Saints. Constantly there for us. And they're constantly interceding for us. And if I may, I'd love to share a story that I think some of my friends right here might remember, maybe not. But years ago, I think it was 2013, I was diagnosed with cancer. And it was a very, very scary time. And I was working at the Chancery, and we have a chapel there. It's small. And in the back, there's a pew. And I don't know if it was a vision. I don't know if I imagined it. It really doesn't matter. It was a beautiful experience that I had. And I closed my eyes, and I was just begging God to please give me a sign, to please be there for me. I was so scared because I was just diagnosed. And I closed my eyes, and I had this vision, or maybe I was imagining it, but I just saw the planet Earth, And I saw these hundreds or thousands of people flying around just with this incredible sense of urgency in their eyes, looking down at earth. Their hair's a mess, it's flying behind it. And I'm watching them all, and they were wearing like elves, and they all looked the same, but their faces were different. Some had beards, some didn't, men, women, and they're flying around. And I yelled out to them, please help me. Because I had this sense that it was the communion of saints. And all of them, thousands of them, stopped immediately, midair, and looked over at me. All of them, just staring right at me. And I had this incredible peace come over me, because every single one of those people that I think was the communion of saints stopped and looked at me, and it was this look of, we have you. We got your back here. We're going to take care of you. And it was an incredible feeling, and the fear immediately went away. And I just felt this sense of peace. Now the cancer was still there, and I still had to deal with all that, but what a moment. It was all just taken away. So without a doubt, when I look at this family, this communion of saints, my closest member of that family, at least for me, is St. Damien of Molokai. He and I, we just have a very special relationship, and I don't know how else to say it. He gives me signs. He's been there more times than I can count for myself and for my family. It's actually overwhelming. And because I'm not too bright, he gives me just the clearest signs in the world, like, boy, you're here again. Like, it's so obvious things that he'll do. But here's the thing, and I learned this a long time ago. I'm nothing special at all. I just learned, probably through having cancer, that I'm powerless without God. I'm just powerless. And so I have this yearning to be closer to St. Damien and to the other saints as well. And it's through these experiences with him that it has opened my eyes to this entire communion of saints, this family that's waiting desperately for us to reach out to them. So of course I'm here to talk about St. Damien, but it's really a message about all the saints. And it's their job, by the way. They're not busy. Don't reach out to them. They're constantly there waiting to intercede for us. There's a story, I doubt anyone here knows of him, but his name is Father Bill Petrie. He's a very old priest. He's a very dear friend of our family, and he's actually in Molokai, Hawaii now. And he was in Fairhaven, Massachusetts. Long story short, he is a member of the Sacred Hearts Fathers of Jesus and Mary, same order as St. Damien. He was in Calcutta with Mother Teresa, St. Teresa, for 30 years. So she had 4 to 5 spiritual directors. She couldn't just do, she was constantly going to different ones because she was constantly on the go. And so depending on the location she was at, she had a spiritual director ready. He was one of her spiritual directors. And he shared only one story with me. He said they were walking along the street in Calcutta, and he said, Mother, I finally figured out how you do what you do. And she stopped. She said, what's that, Father? And he said, it's your powerlessness. And she said, that's exactly right. So he nailed it. It took him 30 years to figure it out, but he still nailed it. So just a brief history, if you will, about myself and St. Damien and my family. I was obviously named after him. My name is Damien Joseph. Joseph is after his baptismal name. He was born Joseph de Vooster, and so my mom named me after him. My mother is from Belgium, God rest her soul, as was Father Damien, of course. My great-uncle was a priest of the Sacred Hearts Fathers of Jesus and Mary, so the same order. He was actually the last missionary priest sent from Belgium from that order. My wife and I, the priest who witnessed our vows was a priest by the name of Father Tom McElroy, who is also a Sacred Hearts Father, who's since passed away. No one had a greater impact on my life to teach me how to be a Catholic man than Father Tom. So just want to do a shout out to him. I've been to Kalaupapa, Hawaii, there's a peninsula that protrudes out, and I'll talk a little bit more later about that, from Molokai, where Father Damien served those that had leprosy. So I've been to Kalaupapa and Kalawao. That's both sides of the peninsula is one. I've been there 3 times. Our wedding, we got married, and our honeymoon, someone gave us a gift. And it was this lady that I taught her grandson, and she said, she called me and asked where I wanted to go on my honeymoon. And I said, And I realized what she was doing, and I taught at a wealthy school, didn't make a lot of money, but taught at a wealthy school. And I said, no, we'll probably go to Cape Cod or something like that. And she said, where do you want to go? What's your dream vacation? And I said, I can't. And she said, I'm an old Italian woman, now you're insulting me. Where do you want to go? So I said, I want to go to Molokai, Hawaii. I want to go see where Father Damien was. And she sent us. There was no way we could have afforded this trip. No way. So she sent us there. As I said, I've been there 3 times. The third time was really special because I got to bring my son, Damien Jr. And he and his sister both are on the autism spectrum, but Damien's very high functioning and very sociable. He's a better man now than I'll ever be. So he's an exceptionally good guy, but he does have autism. So he's socially awkward. And it's okay to laugh at this. I laugh at it all the time, right? So it's this pilgrimage to Molokai. I mean, this is a big deal. 3rd time I'm going. Who gets to go 3 times, right? So we go. I'm bringing my son to where Father Damien serves. And so Damien's going along with this whole thing. We get there. Michelle's already laughing. We get there, and we had to stay in the upper part of the island overnight, and then you take a plane and flew down to the peninsula. So I am so excited. This is a long trip from Connecticut to get up. I mean, think of this whole pilgrimage. And we're sitting in bed, we're sitting at the edge of our beds, and just before we're getting ready, and the next morning we're leaving to go to Molokai, Hawaii. It's awesome. We're there. We're going now. And he says, what are we doing here, Dad? I said, buddy, we're going to where St. Damien was, talking about it for months. Oh, yeah. What's for breakfast tomorrow? But it was still very special. I had the real blessing of being at the canonization of St. Damien, which was October 11th of 2009. And lastly, his feast day is May 10th, which is my favorite day of the year. But it also happens to be the day that I received my first communion. So it's a lot of these little connections to him mean a lot to me. So a little history about St. Damien. He was obviously a Catholic priest from Tremelo, Belgium, which is Belgium's tiny little country. It's in the northern part. So he spoke Flemish, and chances are he was exposed to French. Right now, they'll speak 4 or 5 languages, but at the time, believe it or not, it was more Flemish than French. He was from a farming family, so he knew how to work with his hands. He had to deal with all kinds of situations on a farm, and they just had to handle it. And a lot of it was manual labor, but he learned a lot. Also, before he went into the seminary, he was also learning how to run the business. And the reason he had to run the business is because his 3 older siblings all went into religious life. And so he was it. So his father said, well, you're the one, you got to run the farm. So, but his 3 older siblings, though, because they entered religious life and they were missionaries, he wanted to be like them. This is before TV and cell phones and all that stuff that's kind of filling up our brain and our minds now. So he grew up learning about the lives of the saints. So he wanted to be one of them. He wanted to go out and be a missionary. And so his father was totally against it. But then he obviously had to give in because he joined the seminary. So there's a picture, if you saw this is what this parish used for the talk tonight. There's a picture of St. Damien right here. Interesting little story about that. That was before he left to go over to Hawaii. And he wanted to look like St. Francis Xavier. That's why he stood like this way. He hadn't done 1 day of missionary work whatsoever, but he wanted to do this whole, to look like St. Francis Xavier. So he so desperately wanted to become a saint or be like his older brothers and sisters. His wish came true when he was sent to Hawaii. He actually wasn't even ordained yet. His older brother, Pamphile, was supposed to go, who was really the brilliant one of the family. It wasn't Father Damien. He struggled in the seminary. They said he had excessive happiness and things like that, and they said he'd probably be really great to just be in the choir. Like they didn't. His brother Pamphile was a theologian, but he came down with typhus. So St. Damien, looking back when you know his life, this was no surprise. He went up to the provincial. He skipped all the superiors. And those of you who might be in religious life, that doesn't go too well when you just skip over levels. He went to the top. And he talked to provincial and is sending him to Hawaii, and he said yes. So he upset a lot of people, but he still got sent. So he was ordained in Hawaii. So after that, before that, on the way there, I don't want to forget this part, on the boat, it was like 2 months on this boat. Can you imagine? From Belgium to Hawaii. And he had I'm gonna convert everybody because I'm like St. Francis Xavier. And he didn't. Not one person converted to the Catholic faith that was on that boat, not one. And it was the first time he experienced what he referred to as dark thoughts. So that would mean today he was depressed, he was really down. I'd be depressed too if I was on a boat for that long, and I can't even imagine the condition. But it was the beginning of him understanding to be a missionary is not so simple. It's not just that you pose for a picture. It's much more than that. It was the beginning of him being exposed to that kind of suffering. Once he was ordained a priest, his area that he ministered to and served in was 1,000 square miles. So he referred to his mule as his home because that's where he had all his possessions, which weren't many, obviously, and had everything he needed to celebrate Mass. So imagine 1,000 square miles. So he was constantly on the go. Leprosy became a very serious problem on the islands. And he was there for approximately 7-8 years before, when they realized they need him or somebody to assist them with leprosy and dealing with these people that had it. But before they could even begin to do that, the Hawaiian government decided that we need to quarantine those with leprosy. Quarantine them, put them in another spot. It was an epidemic. And honestly, it was full-blown panic. And so they decided, where are we going to do this? So it had to be relatively close by. So Molokai has a peninsula that protrudes out, like I said before. It's 33 square miles. If you went there today, it's arguably the most beautiful place you've ever been to. It's spectacular. It's so beautiful. So it was a hell on earth then. Imagine the paradise of the view, but you're sent there to die. You're sent there in that settlement. Where the peninsula meets the main part of the island are 2,000-foot sea cliffs, almost straight up. So it was very, very difficult to even think about leaving that settlement. And if you did, it was against the law. And there were people that were killed for that too. And so what do you do? Where do you go? And if these people had leprosy, there were issues with their limbs, their fingers, everything, and inability to walk at a certain point, breathe. All of those things were happening. So they were sent there to this settlement. But it was no settlement. People, including children, were forcibly taken from their families. Think about that for a second. Forcibly taken. If there was even the thought, the threat that you had leprosy, they would rip you from your family. They were literally taking children. And they'd put them on the ships, and they'd take them over to the peninsula. Often the boats, as they get closer to the peninsula there, the leprosy colony, the captains wouldn't want to go all the way to shore. So they'd push them off the side of the boat. So my second time going there, I was by myself in Kalawao and Kalapapa in the peninsula. And I asked this guy who became friends, I said, can you show me where they walked? Like when they would kick them off these boats. And he did. And there's a spot that most people that go there don't even see. Everything else is so beautiful. And he walked me down to the water, and it's these black, rough, jagged rocks. And it was super steep. It's like as high as the ceiling, and they had to climb up that. So you're being sent there to the leprosy colony, where it's total chaos, it's total hell on earth. There's no one there to greet you whatsoever. Imagine children just being thrown off the side of the boat. And they then had to climb up there not knowing what was next. And it was that horrific. They were given no clothing. They were given no supplies, food, shelter, farming equipment. There was no running water. So the government would say they supplied these things, but it was minimal or nothing at all. It was absolutely horrible, and it was hell on earth. And there was no escape. Children had no one to watch out for them. Think about it. Children had no one to watch out for them. The strong controlled the weak, and when those strong became weak, guess what? The new strong ones came in. And that's how it went. The behavior of the people became animalistic. We almost have a hard time imagining what that's like now. It was truly animalistic. The presence of pure evil was all around them. And the stench and sight of rotting flesh was all around them too. But what was worse, I think, was the hopelessness of their lives. Hopeless. People had seen death before and seen tragedy and horrific things. They were hopeless. There was nothing there for them. A priest was needed. A priest was needed. The bishop, who also happened to be the provincial of the Sacred Hearts Fathers, so that was quite convenient. He brought the guys together. He brought his priests together and explained in much better detail than I just did what was going on Kalaupapa and Kalawao, how horrific it was, and they needed priests. So he said, I've decided I want 4 volunteers. I want 4 of you to go. We're going to do it 3 months at a time. We're going to rotate this. And so I offer that because people think it was just St. Damien. It really wasn't. There were actually 4 priests that volunteered to go. St. Damien, though, volunteered to go first. The date was May 10th. That's why the Vatican chose that to be his feast day. It's the day he said, I will go first. Now, the other 3 priests never ended up going there, and I'll explain why in a few minutes. He was a stubborn Belgian man. He said, 3 months, it's not enough time. I need more time. And so, but he was the first, and that was on May 10th. He became known for his holiness, but it was not through what you'd see here. This went away really, really fast. It was not because he looked like maybe a saint. So there's nothing wrong with holy prayer cards. My mom had, when she was dying, had stacks of them next to her chair. She'd just go through my cards, right? It wasn't holy like that. Not that there's anything wrong with that. It was a holiness, though, because of how he acted and how he treated them. The tools that he used were the exact tools that we can use today. The exact same tools. One of the reasons I love St. Damien is because I can be like him. Like I studied St. Catherine of Siena. Oh, I read her life. I'm screwed. I can't do that. She was amazing. Not that he wasn't, but there was something about him that's practical and simple. So what were his tools? His tools were the sacraments. And I'll talk more about that in a minute. And he did whatever it took to make sure they had a sense of dignity. That was no small thing. And that situation, in that world that they lived in, how do you help them have a sense of dignity? So he used the sacraments, and he made sure, no matter what, he helped give them, not preserve, because that was gone already, give them a sense of dignity. So in a place where bodies were rotting, whether they were dead or they were alive, he was known to build a coffin every single day. Because even in death, they are to have dignity. This was remarkable for them to see this. They were abandoned there for years. And now you have someone that's willing to even build a coffin every day. And they'd say, but this person's, he's completely rotted away. Say, even in death, they have dignity. So he had the skills to build these coffins. He used the skills that he had. While he had no converts on the boat on the way there, he's credited to having over 1,000 people convert to Catholicism while they were on the leper colony. He built countless homes for them. Not homes that we have, but they were simple, and they gave him shelter. And he built countless homes. He built 6 churches that we're aware of by hand. When he did get to go away for a little bit, just for a rest, he didn't know how to rest. Neither my mom, so it's funny, these Belgians, but he built churches. So there's some churches that are still there, tiny little ones that are still around. He taught them farming, but most importantly, he gave them Jesus Christ. He gave them Jesus Christ through his actions and how he treated them. All for people who were dying a horrible death, all because of leprosy. He was there for 16 years, and he eventually contracted the disease. And you'll understand why when I explain what he did with those that had leprosy, how he cared for them. So he died on April 15th, 1889, after 16 years, and he succumbed to the disease. There's lots of pictures, you can Google it, of him on his deathbed. And they really felt that he was going to become a saint. So there's some pictures where he looks almost propped up. He actually is. Someone went behind him. I know this just from visiting there, people tell me stories. They propped up his pillows just so he was up a little bit higher so it was better for the picture. And if you look, there's the most famous picture of him. He's full of leprosy, he's got the hat and his arms in a sling. His face is just full of leprosy. If you look at the pictures, if you Google him in his deathbed, the leprosy has left his face. It's gone. Interesting little detail about it. So I propose to you this evening that through the example of St. Damien, we can achieve holiness. We can. And it's through what? Complete reckless abandonment to God and putting our faith into action. And here's the thing I'd like you to remember. Even when you don't feel qualified. Stop worrying about if you feel qualified or not. Put your faith into action and don't worry about all the details. Don't worry, well, this person's so much better at that, this person's better at this, and I just do this little piece here. What's it worth? Stop that. That's not of God. That's of the evil one. So put your faith into action, especially when you don't feel qualified. Because you know what? You're not. We're not. None of us are qualified. So we have to stop thinking qualified or unqualified. Stop it. None of us are qualified. But God is. So if he calls us to do something, we need to respond and do it. Father Damien set out to restore a sense of personal worth and dignity for all the people of Kalaupapa. It didn't matter where they were from. There were some that had leprosy that were not even Hawaiian that were there. He immediately reopened St. Philomena's chapel, which had been built by the Sacred Heart's Fathers previously, and then it was kind of abandoned, to be honest with you. He is often credited with building it. He never built it. It was already there. But he rebuilt it. He expanded it twice because more and more people were joining the faith, so he had to make it bigger. And all those with leprosy were welcome. Well, you probably think, well, of course they were. They all had leprosy. Who else is he going to have? The point, though, is if you had leprosy, it's just a horrific disease. And so you had this, often many of them had to cough up phlegm. And it was unthinkable, just as it would be unthinkable upstairs. You can't, not to be gross, but you can't spit on the floor. You just can't do that in church, right? Father would hate that if we just started spitting on the floor. But they had, it was uncontrollable for them. So how am I supposed to come in? So they would just stay outside. And he's like, this can't be. This can't be. So, being the practical guy who knows how to use tools, if you go into St. Philomena's church today, it's still there, he drilled square-shaped holes in the floor every 2 feet in front of the pews. So when they walk in, he'd give those that needed it a large leaf, and he would cone it so that they could then stick that into the hole, so when they had to spit the phlegm that they couldn't control, it never touched the church floor. It went straight through. Now it's primitive, a little bit gross, but it gave them a sense of dignity. I can come to Mass. I can celebrate Mass. Just because he gave me a leaf. I mean, it's brilliant, actually, when you think about it. So he would do whatever it took to help them have a sense of dignity. He ministered to the sick, those that were bedridden, those that needed the sacraments, and the gifts that he gave them was simply the love of Christ. That's what he was so desperately trying to do. He even fenced in the cemetery, which was really nuts to them. Even though they were starting to love him, they're like, you don't need to fence in the cemetery, Father. You got enough. You're building a coffin every day. You're doing so much for us. And he said, nope. Even in death, there's dignity. And he noticed that scavenging animals would come into the cemetery. And he said, nope, can't have that. And so he actually fenced in the cemetery. So the people were just blown away by his love and practical thinking and how much he was trying to help them. He encouraged them to join him in all his activities. And he was critiqued for this big time. Everything from building homes to making instruments to farming to caring for the sick and the dying to helping celebrate Mass. So he had altar service, people bringing up the gifts. His superiors were furious at him. They said, you're going to die if you keep doing this. We need to keep separate from them. And he wouldn't have it. There was no way he would have it. I actually think of him a lot during COVID. I think about him all the time, actually. And I'm not saying I would do what he did, but he would live very differently than, let's say, I have been. I just know he would have. He said, oh, no, I have to help them. I have to be there for them. So although it was extremely controversial, he would even share his pipe with them and just do this, just share with them. And he smoked a pipe because of the stench of the rotting bodies. That's why he started smoking a pipe. If somebody was eating something and they liked the way it smelled, he would just offer it to them. Now imagine that. They know he's risking his life, and he insisted on sharing because he's given his life to them. The Eucharist was his greatest strength, and he often said, if not for the Eucharist, I could never do what I do. He would say that often in his letters that he would send home. And he knew that it was transforming him, and he knew that it was transforming all of those that were there. And he helped them understand that even on that little peninsula, 33 square miles, they were united with the mystical body of Christ. Imagine that. He took them from total hell to helping them understand that they're united in this mystical body of Christ. He helped them really start to grasp that. He surrendered his skills to God, the tools that he had to God, and look what he was able to do. These are things we can do. The tools are the sacraments. What am I supposed to do after that? He gave you gifts. I don't know what they are. I have no idea. But you know what your gifts are. And you give them to God. And saints come from that. Saints come from that. And please don't compare yourself to others, because that's where it starts to fall apart. God has given you gifts. One of my favorite stories, maybe some of you know of this if you have studied him at all, St. Damien desperately, speaking of the sacraments, wanted to give his confession. And it got to a point where he wasn't allowed to leave the leprosy colony. He wasn't allowed to leave. At first he kind of could, stubborn guy, he'd come and go, and then they said, you may not leave. It was very serious. And so now he couldn't there were no priests that wanted to come. They were scared to death. And I understand. I really do. Like, do you want leprosy? Most people say no. So they were scared. They didn't want to go. So he begged and begged and begged his bishop, who was also his provincial, and he said, fine. If none of my priests will go, I will go. So he did. And I don't know if he chartered the boat or if he just hitched a ride, but he got on a large boat, and they were coming to the peninsula, and the captain said he stopped the boat. And the bishop said, you have to let me get off the boat. You have to get to shore. Father Damien needs me to hear, I have to hear his confession. He said, if you get off this boat, you will not get back on this boat. Very clear. So St. Damien's or Father Damien's looking out there. He doesn't understand what's going on, obviously. So he gets in his rowboat and he rows out there. He's like, what gives? And the bishop yells down to him and explains what I just said to you. And Father Damien said, what if I yell my confession to you from the boat? And the bishop said, why don't we say it in French? Because they both spoke French. And so he did. He yelled his confession from the boat, the rowboat, to the large boat. Imagine that. How often do we take advantage of confession in our own lives? Think about how desperately he wanted, how desperately he understood that he needed to be healed of his sins. He needed that. Wouldn't it be amazing if we all actually thought that way? If we realized how desperately we need to get to confession. Not because we're bad, it's because we're good. And we need to be cleansed of all this and accept God's love. And he just knew it. Imagine, he yelled it from the boat. I would never do that. I can't even imagine it. But he did. The most painful reality was not, in my opinion, was not their leprosy. I think the most painful reality was the families being torn apart. Imagine that just being ripped apart from the family and sent to die. I don't know what's worse. If I'm the one sent there or if I'm the one left behind. As a dad, I can't even imagine the children part. I just can't. So I'm not sure what's worse, but it was pure hell on earth for them. That said, he gave them dignity by giving them family to the best of his ability. It wasn't the same as the family they were ripped away from, but he still gave them a sense of family. I offer that because our vocations to our families, in my opinion, literally impacts the world. I've really come to believe this over the years. Our vocation to our family literally impacts the world. simple acts and profound acts of love for your spouse, for your children, it literally impacts the entire mystical body of Christ. In the instant that you're loving to your family, it permeates, it has an effect. You become Jesus for them. And it doesn't just stay with them, it goes beyond them. And I don't want you to underestimate the impact that you can have in how you love your spouse and how you love your children, how you love your grandchildren, through those loving actions. And I think we're tempted to say, look at how bad the world is. It's so bad. What difference does it make? What difference does it make? And guess who that's speaking to you right now? It's the evil one. Because he must destroy the family. Must destroy the family. Do you think it's any coincidence? The evil one, he must have been at work ripping apart families and sending them to Molokai. Must have been. So we keep this in mind. Understand what we're up against here. But how we love our families literally does impact the world. Don't underestimate, again, the impact that it has. So in society today, and maybe I'm overshooting it just a bit, are we really that different than on Molokai? When you look at some of the details, often lack of authority, medical care, sickness, disease, lost souls, abuse of alcohol and drugs was very serious on Molokai. I assume some of this sounds familiar to you. No religion, claiming there's no God, us becoming God. Abandoned children. We have abortion. We have extreme division. We have shameful behaviors. We look at Molokai like it's this crazy thing in history. Not so crazy. Just because we have nice cars, probably nicer homes and this and that. It's not so crazy. There's things happening right now, and we need to open our eyes to that. It's very serious. And the intentional removal of anything that's Christian in our culture, you must see that happening. Anything that's Christian, it's intentionally trying to be removed. That said, show me a society that really promotes a loving family, a prayerful family, and you will see a society void of these issues. So everything is about attacking the family. It was then and it is now. But look at what one simple, no theologian, simple man did. One person, the impact that had. The fact that I'm even talking about him now, of course he'd never want that. But what one person did, who was, again, no theologian. He was not like his brother or his older sisters. Just a simple man that gave his gifts to God and surrendered himself to God. I encourage you to be proud to be Catholic and eager to live and express your faith as best as you can. But how do we do this? So I offer a reality check. We do not live in a Christian culture anymore. We need to stop thinking that way. We need to stop acting that way. We don't live in a Christian culture anymore. Mission territory, and I've been on many mission trips, and they're always to third world countries, but I've come to learn over the years, mission territory is literally outside those doors right there. It's mission territory. It's the whole Christian culture, the concept of that is not there. It's not like we're getting to that point. We're there. We're here now. And so this is not about me being negative. It's actually the opposite. It's about me trying to be practical. You have to know what you're dealing with. So we've got real darkness, terrible darkness in the world, and we have incredible joy, incredible love. But you got to know what you're dealing with. And I think, I know that Jesus tells us we are to be the light of the world. We're the light of the world. And we're meant to bring him to others. So we have to be intentional about how we do that. To do that, you have to know the reality that you're living in. Ironically, the downfall, in my opinion, of Christian cultures is too often that we Catholics think we have to maintain. Just maintain. See it in parishes, see it in our families, right? Just maintain. And that's exactly what we shouldn't do. We must be apostolic. We don't just keep things going. That doesn't work. That's the danger of Christian cultures. You get real comfortable and just kind of keep it going. And that becomes our downfall. We must be apostolic. Maintenance plans, they don't work. They don't work. We see it I work for the Knights of Columbus, we see this a lot. We're trying to make serious changes in our efforts to evangelize our men. And one of the things we're coming up against the most is these maintenance plans that are out there. Well, this is the way we always do it. We always do it this way. It's not working, and it becomes our downfall. Society desperately needs us to be living our faith intentionally, to emulate Christ. And it's not just through our words, or not just through our actions, it's through our words. We think that our actions are enough. No, we need to speak now too. We need to speak. It's not just through our actions, because people can just ignore that. But if you're speaking about it too, that's what's really needed. The world needs you, and the world needs your families to be living this to the best of your ability. But it makes us uncomfortable. This whole thing about evangelizing, going out, living the faith, it sounds great here. When you go outside, I gotta live this, I gotta speak it, I gotta act this way. It makes some of us very uncomfortable. Deep down, I'm actually an introvert. I'd rather be talking to one of you than all of you, because it's a lot of people here, right? But we have to get beyond that. We have to be living it and speaking it. But we've been uncomfortable before. It was the year 33. Can you imagine if they followed the data? Everybody likes to talk about the data, like, well, the studies say this and the studies say that. Can you imagine if they actually followed, if someone started writing down what they were up against? None of the apostles would have hung around. Let's take a quick look. How many bishops were there? There's 11. How many priests? It's about the same number. How many deacons? 0. Trained theologians? None. Religious orders? None. Seminaries? None. Seminarians? None. Christian believers? A few hundred. Countries with Christians in them? 1. Church buildings? None. Schools and universities? None. Written gospels? There's none. Money? Very little. Experience in foreign missions? None. Influential contacts in high places? Next to none. Societal attitude towards us? Ignorant to hostile. Interesting. Can you imagine if they went by that? So we have to be careful when we look at the data now. Well, studies are saying the world's going in this direction. Does that mean we go in that direction? I don't think so. Not as Catholics. That's not what we do. You can't go by that, because that's telling us to go in that direction. So we've been uncomfortable before. If they went by the stats back then, they should have run away screaming, but they didn't. The Eucharist, it's the same as today, was their foundation. For the first apostles, it was their foundation. And who was their model? It was Jesus Christ. None of this has changed. We think we have to jazz Jesus up, though. Way too much. We think we got to do these special edgy programs, when at the end of the day, if we're not bringing ourselves and others closer to Christ, to Jesus Christ himself, we're missing it. We do this. I've worked for the church for a long time. We always think we got to do this edgy program. But if it's not bringing them to Jesus Christ, we're wasting our time. I've seen this over and over again. So we got to think about that, be very intentional. There's nothing wrong with programs and things like that. They must bring people to Christ. If they're not, I don't care how cool it is, how great the music is, if it's not bringing them to Christ, you're missing it. So where do we start? I think it comes down to 3 words. And hopefully you can remember this. Believe, choose, and avoid. That's how I look at it. Believe, choose, and avoid. It's believing that how you live your faith as an individual, as a family, religious community, as a parish, it's believing that how you live your faith makes a difference. You have to believe it. Because as I said earlier, the temptation is, what difference does it make? Really? What difference does it make? You have to believe that it makes a difference. Yes, and you especially have to do this with the small acts of love, not just the big ones where you think, well, I know lots of it. This is good. What if I just did a small thing? What difference does it make? You have to believe that it makes a difference. Every loving action, when it's based in Christ, given to the Holy Spirit, has a ripple effect beyond what any of us could understand or imagine. There's so many stories, if you read about the saints, where that's the case. The simplest loving action had a ripple effect. So we have to believe that it makes a difference. Secondly, choose. This is really important. We have to choose to live differently and contrary to secular society. The line is drawn here. The stake is in the ground. I choose to live differently. I see the toxicity and the hell that's all around me, and I can't control that, but I can control how I live and how my family lives and how my community lives. I can control that. I can have an impact on that. I have to choose to live differently. And yet, it's not easy to do that, by the way. Oftentimes you'll be mocked for that, or you're on the wrong side of history. You hear all these crazy lines people say now. I choose to live differently. Some of your family members will leave you over this, because you're different from them. But we must do that to follow Christ. We have to believe it first, and we have to choose to live contrary to the secular toxicity that keeps coming into our lives. And sometimes, and I'm not telling you what to do, but it could be a simple thing. What's consuming your time? Is it the cell phone? Is it television? Is it a million podcasts? I mean, do you end your day like exhausted? Like, do you feel fulfilled? Because if you don't feel fulfilled, then you maybe want to look at the things that we're doing. And I'm super guilty of this. Like the day ends like, I thought I got a lot done. I'm exhausted. But I never encountered Christ that day because I was so focused on doing all these other things that were really of the secular world. So we have to choose to live differently than that. I have to choose with my children, and they're older now, but we chose not to have television, which I know is nuts to a lot of people. But I'm like, I don't want them exposed to that, especially the commercials. I was like, we go to somebody's house and they have a commercial, I'm like, oh my gosh, it's soft porn. Like you just see it right there. But if you're exposed to it all the time, it just gets to be normal. So you have to choose to live differently than secular society, and you have to choose to live your faith, and to take part in the sacraments, and for your children to do the same. And the last one is also, it sounds easy, but it's not. We have to avoid that which leads us to sin. Believe, choose, and avoid. You have to avoid that which leads us to sin. It sounds so simple, but here's the thing. Maybe I'm wrong. I'm super blessed to hang around with very holy people. I really am. And they're daily communicants. They're going to confession a lot. They're going to adoration. I mean, they're really checking these boxes. This is really good Catholic stuff they're doing, right? So they think, and this happens to priests too, and ladies, it's the same, where they think, I'm a pretty holy person. So I can put myself in that situation, which exposes me to sin or be in a certain situation. I'm not going to partake in that, but I can be around maybe this attractive woman, let's say, in my case, right? I could be around her a lot. I'll be fine. I go to Mass every day. I'm good. I got this covered. We have to avoid that which leads us to sin, because if we don't, and we expose ourselves to things that we know are going to tempt us, and we think we can handle it, we have just very publicly said, I'm smarter than the evil one. And we never will be. We have to be very, very careful with that. We have to avoid those things that lead us to sin or even tempt us to the best of our ability. Because if we don't, we're saying we're smarter than the evil one, and we're not. And so it's so important. Believe, choose, and avoid. Father Damien believed that through baptism and his priesthood, that it gave him all that he needed to do. It was his instruments. It was how he was able to love, and we must believe the same. He chose to live radically different than what he was seeing around him. And that's what I'm suggesting we do now in this society. Model him. He had the sacraments. We can do that. We can participate in that. And then he chose to live differently. He saw this toxicity, which was beyond our comprehension, this hell on earth, and he still chose to live differently than that. We can do the same. Despite being on a peninsula of only 33 square miles in the middle of nowhere, he still desperately knew that he needed confession. He desperately knew he needed to avoid sin as best as he could. And it was hard there, so hard. We could do the same. It's not even near as hard to avoid it for us. So we need to model him. My relationship with St. Damien started when I was a child. Obviously my mom's named me, and I guess my father had something to do with that too, but it was really my mom. My dad wanted me to name Sean. I don't know if you guys knew that, but don't say anything wrong with Sean. But she instilled in me that I should be very proud of my name. I didn't know any better. No one else had my name. So I did. I just thought it was a really neat name to have. And I thought it was cool. And I had no idea as a child the impact that St. Damien would have in my life. And also how often he would intercede for me. And I've studied him my whole life. And I unceasingly ask for his intercession. I'm a little gluttonous about it, but anyways. And it's really remarkable how often he answers prayers for us. Interpreted individually, you probably say, well, that's just a coincidence, and that's nice. But to me, it's not. It's just something very personal, and for my family too. So I'd like to end with a very personal story. As I mentioned, my mother was from Belgium. Her name is Nellie, God rest her soul, and she moved to Rochester, New York, from Belgium when she was 18. She didn't speak a word of English, and she immediately joined nursing school. So she had to learn, nursing stuff. How hard could that be? And English at the same time. So she had to learn all that. She was amazing. Her entire life, she was a mental health nurse, and people think, wow, that's so admirable. And it was. But she only did it because they had the hours that she wanted to work, when she was you just became a nurse. She just kind of stuck with it. But it wasn't because she felt called to it, but she did it for the family. I need a job. And so she ended up doing that for 40-something years. She was the most selfless person I've ever known. And she did everything possible to stay out of the limelight. Like, she hated the limelight. She did anything just to not be seen or known. She was a person of deep faith for many years, and I thought that she confidently trusted in God. I really thought that. It was more towards the end of her life where I realized how wrong it was. I really thought she confidently trusted in God because she prayed all the time, daily communicant, all that stuff. I was wrong. She depended on God. There's a difference. She didn't confidently trust in Him all the time. She had doubts like all of us, but she depended on God. And that's what I learned towards the end of her life. Mom's go-to saints were the Blessed Mother and Father Damien. And honestly, and this was well before he was beatified or canonized, and honestly, it's the same for me. When we received the awesome news that he was going to be canonized, the Sacred Heart's fathers, who I've already shared, we were close with the community, they were putting a pilgrimage together, and so people could sign up. So, of course, Mom and I signed up right away. Nothing was going to keep us from going to the canonization. And we went, and the experiences of that pilgrimage were overwhelming. I have so many stories in my head. I experienced on that trip what I had learned a long time ago, but it was really hammered in. But God is constantly around us, constantly with us. And it's often the little things, the little signs that He gives that we can't excuse away. And it was so clear and apparent on this trip. We just have to open our hearts to Him. We look for these dramatic signs, and while it does happen sometimes, it's usually not the case, at least in my experience. It's these little signs, and He gave us that. St. Damien was canonized, as I said earlier, on October 11th, 2009. And I knew, being there, or at least I thought I knew, that this date and all the experiences we had meant more than I realized at the time. I really believed that we were going to experience things from that connections would be made, as He always did. In 2012, my mother was not feeling well. And we soon learned that the horrible cancer she had somehow survived 10 years prior had come back, and had come back with a vengeance. She was put on chemotherapy weekly. And so they gave her the 4th week off, they called it. So she was every week chemo, 4th week off. That was for 3 years. So towards the end of that 3 years, she was a shell of herself. But during those 3 years, in many ways, and I'm sure this is common for a lot of you, we switched roles, where she became the child. And not that I became a good dad, but it just kind of happened. Things, they just changed. And you could tell in our conversations. And she would often tell me about these wonderful blessings that she experienced while suffering. And I thought, that's crazy. But then I was also diagnosed with cancer a year after she was. And so we were sharing these experiences together. And she would just talk about these wonderful blessings. And I would always ask her, do you know what time of day that happened? Like roughly? And it was almost always between the hours of 3 p.m. and 4 p.m., the hour of mercy. Almost always. And I was like, Mom, and I was teaching her about that. And she's like, oh, I didn't know about all that. So I was explaining it to her. She had no idea. But then it became a cool thing for her. She was so sick and frail. She just loved it. It happened at like 3:14 today. So those years that Mom was really dying, she, for me, exemplified Father Damien. There's no record of him confidently trusting in God at all times. There's no record of that at all. On the contrary, he courageously depended on God. Same as well. Exact same. He readily admitted that without the Blessed Sacrament and confession, he never could have done what he did. That's exactly how Mom lived and ultimately died. She depended on the sacrament. She depended on that. The days leading up to Mom's death were in many ways just a blur. I know a lot of you have had these experiences, often exhausting, making several trips back and forth from Connecticut to Rochester, not knowing if that was your last trip. Many of us have been through this before. Like you just don't know. And wondering if it was the last time I'd see her alive. But on the final trip, it ended up being the final trip. I drove through the night because it seemed clear that it was probably she had maybe 24 hours left. So I got there in the morning. She had a respirator on. It was horrible. It just was. Didn't want to see her that way, obviously. And we stayed with her and tried to comfort her. You know how this goes. It's awkward. You know what to say or do. She can't speak. This thing is her head's moving from the respirator. So you're doing random things just to hopefully giving her some comfort. And every time she tried to speak, we had no idea what she was saying. But then at one point, she really wanted to speak, and we were like, Mom, you did a great job. It's okay. You can go. Like we were just trying so hard to help her just let go. But this was a woman from Belgium who survived Nazi-occupied Belgium in World War II. And she was going to go on her own terms, no matter what we said. So I'd like to think that we helped her a little bit by letting go. I don't think we actually did. So it was about 1:30 in the afternoon, and my mom really wanted to speak. And my sister-in-law put her ear right up to her mouth. And we took the respirator off at that point. It was getting silly, and just the oxygen in her nose. And my sister-in-law put her ear right up to her mouth. And I didn't hear what she said. And my sister-in-law stood back and said, "Why do you want to know what time it is?" And I gasped because I knew what she was doing. And then she went back she was then unconscious again. Mom died at 3 p.m., the hour of mercy. And it was October 11th, the anniversary of St. Damien's canonization. St. Damien, and I would dare say Mom, taught us that if we pay attention to God's love and his mercy around us, we will experience a love, even in the midst of suffering, so profound, it's almost difficult to describe. The trick, I think, is that we must constantly name the little signs, the little gifts. Because in my life, I've discovered that if I am disciplined enough to do that, I then experience a symphony of God at work because I connected the dots. And again, I'm not terribly bright, so it's so clear to me all of a sudden when I name it. It's not a coincidence. It is a gift, even if it's from a complete stranger, that you have to name it. And suddenly it's a symphony, and you suddenly realize that God was there the whole time. But I just learned to open my eyes. All that's left is that we use the gifts and talents that God has given us for his greater glory and as our gift back to him. It's that simple. Just like St. Damien. Just like St. Damien. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Something, huh? It's beautiful.
Yes, so Carol just asked me to tell a story. I'm very happy to answer questions. I'll say I could talk a while. So, but if you have any questions about St. Damien at all, but he 3 years before, it was 1886. He died in 1889. He in his homily said, "We lepers," and that was when they realized that he had leprosy. And he didn't do this dramatic pause, by the way. He just kept talking. We lepers, like it was a normal thing. See, so. Anyways, yes?
I have 2 questions.
Sure.
At the time, I can look it up, but was Hawaii in the United States then, or was it separate? It
was the Kingdom of Hawaii.
The Kingdom of Hawaii, so it's those people that enforced this restriction on them. And what is there now
What is,
on the peninsula, et cetera?
it's a great question. It is National Historic Park, so which I'm happy about personally because it's preserved. So there are, believe it or not, leprosy it's kind of a cocktail of medications that it doesn't make it go away, but it stops it. So there were people that were in the colony there that were offered to continue living there. And once they had access to come and go as they wanted to, a lot of them chose to stay. So I think there's 8 people still left. I've met some of them, Michelle's met some of them, and you wouldn't even know that they had leprosy because they were really young children when they received this cocktail of medications that stop leprosy. So it's a National Historic Park. It's actually very hard to get down there. You have to have special permission. And it's all because of the people that are still living there.
So then one more follow-up. Where's he buried?
It's a great question. So in 1936, I'm not happy about this. I don't think he would have been either. The leprosy settlement was in Kalawao. The weather was really not conducive to living there, and so they moved to the other side of the peninsula. So as a result, where he was buried, next to St. Philomena's Church, and there's a cross there, and you could see where he's buried, as it was unkept. And the Belgian government asked the United States government, because now it was one of our states in 1936, may we exhume the body, bring it back to Belgium? And we said yes. So to this day, the Hawaiians are devastated by that. And I don't think Father Damien would have wanted to leave there. So I'll try to make this quick. He's now in Louvain, which is pronounced Leuven in Flemish, in St. Joseph's Church. There's a crypt. It's quite beautiful. Not a lot of people are going there though. I've been there a bunch of times. It's beautiful, but there's not a lot of people there. When he was canonized, when he's beatified, they removed his right hand. We Catholics. He sent it back to Hawaii, and it was reinterred. So his right hand's Hawaii, the rest of him is. Sorry, you asked. So.
Can you tell us what you have here?
Yes. So these are relics of St. Damien. They're second-class relics, but I still think they're pretty cool. So you're welcome to come up later and look at these if you like. But my great uncle there's got a red dot. So he was part of the his procession in 1936 when they brought him back into Antwerp, Belgium, and he's right there. And when they opened up the coffin itself, he was buried. I don't know if you can see. This is the most famous picture of him, I think. And you'll see larger images of that. His right arm is in a sling. That sling was given to him by Sister Marianne Cope, who's now Saint Marianne Cope. So it's associated with 2 saints. This is the largest piece of that sling in the world, here. My uncle was there when they opened the coffin, so they were they were. And there's envelopes here to show where it was stored. Envelopes, imagine this. My mom had all this stuff, and she goes, "Now, Uncle Pierre," that's how you say it in Flemish. Uncle Pierre had these envelopes with Father Damien, and I opened it up. I'm like, "Do you know what you have?" Wow. And so I reached out to people I know in Hawaii, and they said, "Yes, that's the largest piece in the world. Would you donate it to us for our museum?" And I said, "No." So, and also here is a piece of the coffin that's there, and you're welcome to come up later and look, and a piece of his black cassock, which you saw from, that he was buried in there. So, pretty awesome. So, and I was just, this is not bragging, I'm so excited. A friend of mine who's a priest in this diocese just requested a first-class relic of him, of St. Damien, and he got it. And it's a piece of his hair. And so it's currently now in Rome with a friend of mine who is splitting it in two. So I'll have a first-class relic of St. Damien. So I'm really excited about that. Any other questions?
What did they speak then? Did he speak Flemish to these individuals? They weren't Americans, so
No, he learned Hawaiian.
he learned Hawaiian.
Yeah. Which was interesting because he had a hard time even learning French when he was in Belgium. But he had to learn Hawaiian to be able to serve them. And he did. Not only did he learn the language, he learned the songs, and he was quite the musician too with them. So yeah, he had to learn Hawaiian. Yes, sir.
Were they all Hawaiians that had they didn't come from other countries that brought them there?
Most of them were Hawaiians, but if you were from another country and you happened to be in Hawaii and you contracted leprosy, they'd take you. Send you there. Yeah. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
At the highest number, how many lepers were there approximately at the most?
I think it was like 500 or 600, which is a huge number. Yeah, but they were coming and going. I don't mean that flippantly. Like if people were dying so quickly, and then others were being sent there. It was horrible. What's that?
When they died in the spot, but the dignity
Yeah.
put the rocks on top of them. So if you walk on Molokai, there's just
You can speak louder, Steve.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead. When you're walking around Molokai, what they did is they died in place. Then they would bury the rock. They would bury them right there and put the rocks on top of them. So when you're walking, it's like you're walking on like gravestones, really, because you like not everywhere, but you can see where there are mounds where people were buried just right where they fell.
Yes, sir.
So you said there were 4 priests that volunteered.
Yeah.
Father Damien went first. Did the other 3 ever?
No.
No.
No, I'm glad you brought that up. They did want to go, and they deserve credit for volunteering to go. They knew they'd probably die for going. But he refused to leave. 3 months was really nothing. And then it became a year, and then they became my people. Like it was, then he just refused to. And then these priests were reassigned other places because he just wouldn't leave. He just wouldn't. And he's a saint, but he was no saint. Like he was a very difficult man. Very stubborn, angry. There were people that tried to come and help, and if he didn't like the way they worked, or whatever it was, he'd give them a really hard time. And then they'd leave, and then his friends would be like, "You're killing me here. Yeah, people trying to help you out." No. So St. Mary and Cope, they became very close. They weren't close at first, but they became close. He was always the farmer. I can't even imagine how he must have smelled and looked. Where the sisters, well, they were like, I don't know about this thing called cleanliness. Like because you're dealing with leprosy. See, that's important. And they'd say, Father Damien, you gotta wash your hands, you gotta this, that. I don't have time. He was constantly on the go. None of the sisters ever contracted leprosy, which is interesting. So, but he did.
Wasn't 16 years a long time to be there without contact?
It's a very long time. Oh yeah, especially the way he lived. That's a very, very long time. And there was accusations against him, and I don't want to go down that rabbit hole where he was having inappropriate behavior with women and this and that, and then they discovered that it just wasn't true at all. But there was all those things came in. There was actually, believe it or not, a whole jealousy thing going on because he was his superiors, and because the bishop ended up dying, and then another one came in, and he was getting worldwide attention because he'd send his letters home to his brother Pamphile and his family and this and that, and they would publish the letters, and then they get republished, and so they thought he was being arrogant and this and that. Imagine saying this about this guy, just giving his life, but he still had to deal with that too. Now he had people, his own superiors, they were getting upset with him because they said you're being arrogant and this and that, and he wasn't. He was just sending letters home, So. Anybody else? So there was a few people, there was Joseph Dutton was one of the men that was able to stay there, that he did get along with. He was in the military for, gosh, I don't know how many years, and he never talked about what he did in the military, but he wanted to go there to atone for his sins. And he said, I just want to serve. And this guy was a tough man. And so they kind of hit it off. And he referred to him affectionately as Brother Joseph. So you'll see in history books as Brother Joseph Dutton, but he was never in a religious order. And then the Franciscan sisters, they came in and they took over after St. Damien. All right, well, if you'd like, and there's no rush, but you're welcome to come up and look at the relics. I think we're still in COVID, so we won't be necessarily venerating them or kissing this if you don't mind, but you're very welcome to come up, and I'll be here for a while. If you want me to bore you with more stories, I'm happy to do that. So, but thank you again for this opportunity.